After a series of introductory framework lectures on Walter Raleigh's The Discovery of Guyana, today we will be beginning the process of a critical examination of the text, which would help us situate the text in the context in which Walter Raleigh lived, worked, and wrote. Now, let us remember that the full title of Walter Raleigh's text is not The Discovery of Guyana as we commonly know it, but the discovery of the large, rich, and beautiful empire of Guyana. And in those days, or even later, titles of works were fairly extensive wordings of the scope of the entire work, but we would accept The Discovery of Guyana for our purpose as the title of the text. Now, what is this text about? To put it plainly, so Walter Raleigh's The Discovery of Guyana gives his account of his own voyage to Guyana, and the text serves to advise and advertise Guyana as a colonial territory to the nobility and the royalty back in England. However, when we read the text of Walter Raleigh's The Discovery of Guyana, we are convinced at a number of places that Walter Raleigh's narration is at best unreliable, since much of his information about Guyana that we get in the text was second hand. The nature of this unreliable narration serves to clarify Raleigh's reasoning behind his description of the land, the rhetorical techniques he uses, and the intent or the motive of the work itself. From the onset of the text, I mean, when we begin the text, we are shocked, as it were, into looking at Raleigh's position as the writer of this text, which is that he begins the text essentially to restore his credibility, which was then at its lowest ebb in England. However, the actual work does just the opposite, because it was clear to many readers back then in Raleigh's time that though Raleigh was attempting to restore his credibility in England, his work did just the opposite, because it portrayed a fictionalized Guyana. So it's not the Guyana of reality. It was the Guyana of Walter Raleigh's fiction, where a number of things, as we will see in our discussion, are made up by Raleigh. And in this context, it was clear to Raleigh himself that he was actually fictionalizing the trip. It's not that he did not go there. It's not that he did not visit Guyana, but most of the intricacies of description that we get in the work, they are second hand. In other words, Raleigh got it from other sources which might not have been original. And in this work, Raleigh uses rhetorical techniques and careful language to disguise his deceit, as his role as messenger of Guyana's truth affords him credibility and authority on a subject of which he knows very little. Okay, so there are two things which are important as we go into the text proper. One is That text is a fictionalized account. So much of the intricate details and descriptions that we get in the text, they are second hand information and second hand details. But the other side is that Walter Ellis' colonial framework was genuine because he was very, very familiar with how colonialism worked in his times. So, thus, as I told you in an earlier discussion, this work reveals Raleigh's own general colonial ideology, and in fact, this is why we study this text today in this paper. That is, this work is a very, very powerfully expressed platform of Walter Raleigh's own colonial ideology, which he applies to the text by portraying a generalized, a constructed, and a fictionalized reality. And throughout the text, we find that Walter Raleigh constructs a sense of what we may call an Englishness for himself, which, coupled with his role as the servant of the crown, transmutes his own ideology onto the ideology of the colonial text, and that makes this combination makes this text a very, very powerful platform of English colonialism. Now, in this case, the first thing that comes down to us as readers is, if Guyana or the discovery of Guyana is a fictionalized text, what is true in the text and what is not? Clearly, when I say that the discovery of Guyana is a fictionalized text, I mean that not all of, most of the text is fiction. Fiction in terms of descriptions, fiction in terms of characters, fiction in terms, as we see, of names, fiction in terms of geographical descriptions, but a general adherence to the colonial concept of English rule that is there in the text itself. So, what we have in this text initially is some form of a contrast. And what is the contrast? The contrast is, as I've said, the truth of Raleigh's voyage to Guyana. That is indeed true. We have evidence that Walter Raleigh did go to Guyana. That cannot be disputed. So the truth of Raleigh's voyage to Guyana is contrasted with the vivacity of his portrayal of the land, which is highlighted through certain rhetorical techniques to create a forged reality. So it's not a reality that is real, it's a reality that is forged. And what sort of a forged reality it is? For example, Raleigh portrays Guyana as a gold rich empire. So this is an immediate red herring, as it were, of the genuineness of the text. So when we read a text where Raleigh says that he has gone to a country which is rich in gold, we can automatically infer that there's a lot of fiction in it because it's geographically impossible. It's an empire which is rich in gold, which is full of pastoral landscapes and maybe childlike natives, which is so far unconquered by the Spanish or the other colonial powers. So this is what Walter Raleigh wishes to portray, that the natives are very childlike, they are docile, and it's still a territory which is yet to be conquered. However, the reality of the history of the time suggests that the Guyana of the late 16th century, which Walter Raleigh portrays, is very, very different from the Guyana which is advertised in this work. How do we know it? We know it because we have sufficient evidence to suggest that Raleigh never penetrated or went beyond the country's borders. So this is the first obvious sign that Raleigh was making up a lot of the content through hearsay. He did not penetrate, he did not go beyond the country's borders. And as such, much of the construct of the text is built upon hearsay. Though Raleigh had Guyana described to him by trusted actors, such as his right hand man Lawrence Keymis, Keymis. Okay, he was one of the right hand men of Raleigh himself. At times, even Keymis's information, as we see, is second hand. That is, even he has got it from someone else. So, what we have in the text of Raleigh is not only a second hand, but even a third hand at best, and at worst, a totally fictionalized account of his mission to Guyana. And also, at this point in time, it would be better if we understand that Raleigh's mission in Guyana was not to colonize, but it was essentially to discover. So there's a difference between the two. When we say that it's a colonial mission, you go much beyond or deeper than mere discovery. Whereas if you go on a discovery mission, your work or your activity would be more or less superficial in terms of of description of certain lands, people, their habits, living standards, etc., which Raleigh does mostly in this particular text. And what was the ultimate purpose of Raleigh in writing this work? One was obviously, as I told you in an earlier class, to redeem his prestige, to redeem his power before the queen. But there was another purpose. The purpose was to make this text a successful travelogue. Since most English people, they lived in England and they always imagined that there are lands beyond their territory, which is so unlike them that any description of such a land would immediately make a very, very powerful, interesting reading material. So, at the end of this point, what we are to infer is that Raleigh could not discover, he discovered Guyana, but he could not discover it deep enough. This is one. The other is he creates a fictionalized or a literary Guyana, not a geographical Guyana, in which he places the burden of proof upon language rather than first-hand experience or physical matter. And Raleigh's repeated focus in the texts is essentially obscure. In other words, we don't know exactly what he's focusing at any one point in time because the entire text is built upon a fictionalized and a superficial account. And it is this fictionalized and superficial account which accounts for most of uh, Raleigh's rhetorical figures. This text abounds in rhetorical figures, most of which are needless if a person is attempting a journalistic description of a work. But the moment the reality of the journalistic description recedes, the author has to fall back on rhetorical jargons, which is what Raleigh does here. And today, when we read this text, it is these plethora of rhetorical jargons which actually catches Raleigh off guard, as it were, and we are more or less convinced that this is a text which was fictional. It was not a journalistic or an accurate description of a deeper discovery. And in this particular context, we have to understand the wit of Walter Raleigh in using this. What was that? Walter Raleigh knew himself that he was writing a fictionalized account. But he, because of his credibility, could not reveal that he was writing a fictionalized account. So how could he do that? He could do that. I mean, all know, if you look at his biography, he was an expert poet, he was an expert literary, he was well versed in the use of the language. So if he would think of portraying a fictionalized account, he could do that with a lot of conviction. And we are sure today that his text had a lot of conviction in his times. It may not carry that journalistic conviction today, since we know a lot of what Guyana was, or what that country was at that point in time. But surely in his time, Walter Raleigh's success was largely because of his success in hiding his fictionalized account through the expert use of language. So how does he do that? He does this continuously throughout the text, and usually he does it by using established facts to lend credence to his elaborations. So it's some sort of, to put it very bluntly, nobody will believe a liar who lies 100% of the time. But if a liar peppers majority of lies with some truths, his lies would gain a greater credibility. This is the narrative strategy of Walter Raleigh here. What is it? He uses established facts, established historical facts which are not disputed, either in England or anywhere else. And he establishes these established facts and builds up a fictionalized account of it. So, for example, Raleigh uses precise geographical descriptions to anchor or describe Guyana's borders. Now, when you describe the borders of a country very precisely, very precisely in cartographic terms, a reader will automatically infer that here is a person who has actually visited the place. Because in those days, obviously, there were very few cartographic texts which described in popular terms how a country's borders were. So logically, when that is accurate, it was natural for readers to infer that, okay, here is a person who has actually visited and seen the place. And what was that? Sorry. Walter Raleigh repeatedly invoked map making or cartography, and this was something which was very popular in Elizabethan times. And most English readers in those days, they did have some form of an idea of the boundaries of land, the descriptions of people who lived in those lands, not in accurate terms as in today's times, but nevertheless a vague generalization that this is a land which is this. Okay, so even those people who had an idea that here is a land which is bounded, for example, in the north by mountains, in the east by the sea, in the west by the plains, in the south by by a forest, you would automatically understand as readers that he is referring to a particular land and not any other land. And in this particular context, it's very clear that though Walter Raleigh could not discover the physical territory of Guyana in terms of its deep accessibility, but by placing the land in terms of a cartographic truth, gives some form of a credence or a credibility to use his to a credibility to his work. This is one thing. The other thing is Walter Raleigh's colonial ideology was very much like English colonial ideology, which displayed a desire for conquest. And remember, the manner of conquest in English colonial ideology is almost always idyllic and peaceful. So this is something which is very important and which comes out very powerful in Walter Raleigh's The Discovery of Guyana. It is not English colonialism's ideology is not a colonial ideology that describes or bases itself on violent bloody battles against the natives. This is not how the Englishmen packaged their colonial exploits. How did they package it? They packaged it as some form of an unresisted entry into a different land where the natives are simple, they are docile, they are more than eager to welcome these English colonizers because they feel that these English colonizers would come and change their lives for the better. This is the colonial ideology that is expressed here in the discovery of Guyana. But the reality is very much different. And the reality is clearly one of violent encounters. We, for example, in Walter Ellis' The Discovery of Guyana, we have an evidence of one such violent encounter where Walter Raleigh even loses his son. So clearly, when you base a description of an ideology, colonial ideology, which is based on peace, that runs counter to what actually happens in your description, in your text, where you lose your son in a skirmish. And it was a very, very violent skirmish. So clearly, we as readers today would understand that there is a clear differentiation between the English colonial ideology, which catered to the theory that everything was peaceful, and everywhere there is a welcoming hand which takes in English colonizers back into their land. It is far from truth. And most of these English colonizations actually took place successfully after a series of victories in violent battles. Look at, for example, the colonization of India. We had so many battles which the English Navy were fighting against the Portuguese, against the French, a number of battles in a number of places all across the Indian subcontinent. And since they were successful in most of them, if not all of them, India was under an English colonial rule and not a French or a Portuguese colonial rule, generally, in terms of the entire subcontinent. So it's not that these English colonizers came in and people welcomed them with open arms. It's not that. But Walter Raleigh is wanting to portray one such colonial theory whereby he says the natives are too simple and docile and they welcomed anyone from England who wished to conquer the land, to colonize the land. This is one thing. The other thing is that Walter Raleigh repeatedly feminizes and infantilizes the natives of the people of Guyana. The natives of Guyana. Now, this is something which is again very, very relevant for a different purpose. He very often compares the natives of Guyana to either small children, in some cases, who are too simple to take care of themselves, or to women who he says are again too simple and needs a constant care and protection in order to survive. And therefore, he constructs an English duty philosophy whereby it was incumbent on all general Englishmen to take care of people who are weak, who are considered childlike, who are considered naive. And that was another reason why he said that the people of Guyana would rather want an English colony there rather than a Spanish colony. Okay, so what we have here in this text is next a contrast between the colonial ideology of England and the colonial ideology of Spain. For Raleigh, Spanish colonies were all outcomes of extreme violence, extreme repression against the natives, loss of life of the natives, and a general distrust of the Spaniards by the natives. And he says the English colonial perception or experience is just the reverse. Okay, and he gives a number of examples in his text to suggest that the Spanish colonies in other parts of Americas were defined by violence and subjugation. And in contrast, the English colonies are built up as a peaceful and in some sense a colony under the patriarchal English protection. And that is how Walter Raleigh builds up his own sense of superiority, as it were, as an Englishman, onto the text. Now, at the same time, if you go a bit deeper as to how far this text is a reflection of Walter Raleigh's own self as an individual who had a great influence in the court once upon a time, and that influence certainly went down, as I told you in an earlier class, to the extent that he had to ultimately lose his life because people complained that he was conspiring against the royalty. So, what sort of an ideology of Walter Raleigh's self is reflected in this particular work? Very clearly, as the author of the text and the primary agent of its truth, whatever truth remains in the text, Walter Raleigh injects his own sense of self into the ideological content of the work. So, a lot of the ideology of the text is nothing but an injection of Walter Raleigh's self into the ideology. For example, the extreme sense of superiority that Walter Raleigh exhibited all through his life is exhibited in the manner of the English sense of superiority over the natives or over the other competing colonizers. Okay, so the text therefore reflects, in a sense, Walter Raleigh's sense of self, a superior self, and his self is defined by the context of English ideology in this particular work. Specifically, what the text advertises Walter Raleigh's identity as an Englishman. It describes what it means to be English to Walter Raleigh. For example, in the preface of the text, we have an evidence where Walter Raleigh makes it clear that he is sworn to the English nobility. So the fact that English nobility runs into his blood is what is the basis of Walter Raleigh's sense of the self as it is injected into this text. But remember, as I told you, this English nobility actually is made as a proxy, some form of a proxy for the English people. So what he's wanting to essentially tell is that English nobility that is reflected in his self is actually the English nobility that is reflected in every Englishman's self. And therefore he concludes and he repeats it repeatedly that whoever claims Guyana shall be the greatest. And these are the exact words that he uses. Whoever claims Guyana shall be the greatest. And therefore he is indirectly, as an English nobility, member of the English nobility, urging the English monarchy for permission in order to go ahead and conquer Guyana. Because all along his conviction is built up on the theory that Guyana is a country which is rich in gold, and any country that conquers Guyana will be a country that would be rich, materially rich. And therefore, this work is also some form of an advocacy for the conquest of Guyana. Because remember, in an earlier class, I told you, Walter Raleigh got the permission to visit Guyana on the condition that he would not be disturbing the Spaniards who were already settled there, since King James did not want to antagonize the Spaniards back home. So Walter Raleigh's work was clearly cut out. You can go to Guyana, but please do not involve yourself in any skirmishes, in any battles, or any action which antagonizes the Spaniards, because that repercussion would be felt back home in England. But unfortunately, though he himself did not want it, because of circumstances beyond his control, there was a skirmish in which he lost his son. So clearly, Walter Raleigh reinforces, in a sense, the English nobility's desire for conquest and appeals indirectly to the monarch for this sort of a permission, as it were, to engage with the Spaniards and take over Guyana. And in doing so, Walter Raleigh reinforces, as it were, the English difference with the Spaniards. I mean, a difference in what sense? Difference in the sense of uh, the nature of nobility, difference in the sense of the genuineness of the ideology of colonialism and the desire for peace. So, for Walter Raleigh, English colonialism was philosophically and practically more superior to Spanish colonialism. Now, in this case, Walter Raleigh gives out a number of advantages which the locals would have if the English colonized them. For example, and I'm quoting from the text, he says, if the uh, Englishmen they colonized Guyana and brought in people from England into Guyana to settle there, Walter Raleigh says Englishmen there would discover a pastoral landscape in which all Englishmen would reap pleasures through, and I quote, the common delights of hunting, hawking, fishing, fowling, and the rest. Unquote. So these are the activities which were very, very interesting and attractive to an English commoner. So when Walter Raleigh says that if England conquers Guyana and there are Englishmen who are put into Guyana to settle there, Englishmen would enjoy these common delights. So look at this. Walter Raleigh's appeal is not only to monarchy to give him permission, but also to create an indirect pressure on the monarchy by appealing to the common Englishmen the pleasures that would come to them if Guyana was conquered by England. And not only that, he also reminds the readers in England by describing distinct English tastes catered to by a landscape which is perfectly palatable for an English audience. In other words, he is repeatedly highlighting that if you conquer Guyana, if you colonize Guyana, if you settle there, it would be very, very akin to the essay quintessential English tastes. I mean, for Englishmen, they would only have a lot of added pleasures without the pain of adjusting to a land which is different from them. So it's a win-win situation, as it were. Walter Raleigh peddles this idea that it's a win-win situation for everyone in England if the English monarchy decides to give a go-ahead so that Guyana can be conquered. Now, the entire concept is built on this Englishness of ideology or Englishness of identity. But remember, at this point in time, when he is revealing English identity through his identity, his own relationship with Queen Elizabeth is also reflected in the text. His relationship with Queen Elizabeth. Now, as I told you in an earlier class, I'm repeating it again. He was one of the closest members of the English royalty in Queen Elizabeth's time. He was, in fact, the closest that one could get in Queen Elizabeth's hierarchy of power. But that position was lost after Queen Elizabeth discovered that he had already, by that time, secretly married one of the chambermaidens of Queen Elizabeth. Whether you call it jealousy or you call it some anger that is born out of the fact that her closest companion has betrayed her by concealing the fact of his marriage, whatever you call it. I mean, it's a matter of conjecture as to what it is. But nevertheless, we cannot deny the fact that subsequent harshness of Queen Elizabeth towards Walter Raleigh, I mean, both Walter Raleigh and his wife were put into the Tower of London and imprisoned for the simple fact that they married without informing the Queen. And that clearly highlights that an element of jealousy was very strongly at work in Queen Elizabeth's mind. And clearly, Walter Raleigh never recovered that position that he had, either in Queen Elizabeth's time or even in her successor, King James's time. Now, what do we have in this text? We have in this text a number of appeals. And remember, Walter Raleigh was writing this text when his relationship with the Queen was no longer close. It was when he had already suffered bouts of imprisonment at the hands of the Queen. He says, Walter Raleigh says, he is undergoing this voyage, that is his voyage to Guyana, even in the winter of my life. These are the exact word that he says. In the winter of my life. Now, what would that mean? That means much of my life is spent. I don't have anything to gain personally, and whatever I am wishing to say is a wish for the betterment of the English nobility and the English monarchy. So he is injecting a sense of selflessness into this text. And this clearly refers to his fall from grace, as I told you, in the eyes of the Queen. But in writing this discovery, this text, he was aware of his deception. I mean, he was telling something, but he was feeling something else. And this often gets out into the text in places where he's a bit careless about concealing his real self or real identity. For example, we have a number of instances in the text where he vacillates as to whether he should have done more in Guyana so as not to fictionalize his voyage, or even if he should have foregone the trip rather than risk fabricating a report. So these things, which were continuously at war in his subconscious, are revealed in a number of places in the text. And at times we feel that maybe Walter Raleigh was thinking while writing that he would better have foregone this voyage and left this voyage to whom? To some of his lieutenants, rather than involving in the voyage himself. So these ideas of some sense of a guilt about writing a fictionalized account, that constantly betrays itself in this text. For example, Walter Raleigh does not know any other way in which Guyana would please the Queen. Clearly, for a queen and for a member of the royalty, as Raleigh's teacher who is close to the Queen, the closest that can be attractive to the Queen would be a new land which is full of gold, quite obviously. And therefore, for Raleigh, the land of Guyana has to be conquered because it is a land which would give unending gold. Now, no land gives unending gold clearly, but that was his way of currying favor with the Queen. That look, I am doing a service for you, and that is I am discovering a land for you which will give you uninterrupted supplies of gold if you desire to conquer it. So these are ways and means by which he was trying to come close or to regain the initial prestige and position that he had earlier to his, the discovery of his marriage to Queen Elizabeth's chambermaid. So what sort of a text do we have here to conclude? In constructing an imaginative version of Guyana, now this version is imaginative. Let us uh, as readers do not suffer from this illusion that here is a text which is a journalistic account of a discovery of a voyage. No, it's not. The entire text is more or less based on an imaginative hearsay version of what Guyana is about. Okay, and in constructing this imaginative version of Guyana, Raleigh indirectly constructs his perception of his own self, as I told you, as an English nobility or a member of the English, indirectly as a member of the English royal family. And that is injected into the text and is also manifested in the English colonial ideology that he portrays. And therefore, Raleigh's portrayal of himself and Guyana is somehow relative, as his sense of the self defines Guyana, which also simultaneously defines him. and the pastoral paradise that he creates, his desire for the English to hold it as a colony, it annotates his allegiance to the English nation, and which he constructs as a contrast to the the colonizing setup of the Spanish other. And in doing so, in this work, how does Walter Raleigh define or inject his own self of English nobility? He defines Englishness essentially as the absence of Spanish brutality, Spanish love for violence, and the presence of English civility, because both the nations are competing to get or to achieve similar goals, but in different ways. And therefore, Walter Raleigh's chief position here is as a spokesperson of the English nobility, and especially as a loyal spokesperson to the crown. But ironically, and this is what we would infer today as readers in the 21st century, that Walter Raleigh's deception in constructing a fictionalized account of Guyana displays clearly a quantifiable disloyalty to the nobility. And this is very, very ironic, but that's true. And if one views the discovery as some form of a symbolism of Walter Raleigh's loyalty to the Queen, through Guyana as some form of a metaphor, as it were. Some critics have even interpreted Guyana as a metaphor for the wife of Walter Raleigh. The deceptive nature of the text reinforces Walter Raleigh's sense of self as someone who is more than willing to mislead his sovereign, to mislead his king or queen or his superior. Okay, so what we have in this text is essentially this. Walter Raleigh attempts to create a picture of, or a construct, ideological construct of an English colonial setup entirely on deception. And this deception is not only geographical, this deception is philosophical as well. And though he himself panders to the fact that he is wanting this not for his own self, because he is in the winter of his life, but essentially to ensure that English nobility or the English people get richer by conquering Guyana, he is actually doubling that load of deception that this text carries throughout. And this is the first general idea or critical idea that we have to cultivate while we are reading this text. It is not a generalized account, it's not a journalistic account. It is usually hearsay at a majority of places, sometimes even heard third hand, and sometimes it's entirely fictional. And we'll specify these fictional elements in a subsequent lecture, which are plainly lies. But the motive of Walter Raleigh was this. He was wanting desperately to endear himself to the English royal mainstream after falling from grace. And clearly, history tells us that he could not succeed ultimately because his life ended at the scaffold. Okay, so this is how I would begin my critical appreciation of Walter Raleigh's discovery of Guyana. In a subsequent class, we will unravel these natures of deceptions episode by episode and highlight the essential hollowness of Walter Raleigh's philosophy of an English civility that governs English colonization. Thank you all.